Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this week's African News. I am your host, Tierney Cherie. We're going to go through some news stories that I thought was very relevant for you to know. So let's get started. The first story we're going to go through is something that happened in a South African-based airline. I'm going to share my screen in case you haven't heard of this airliner. It's called Ryanair, and there's some controversy going on. Essentially, a language litmus test was being implemented. So I wanted everyone to know about this story because it's important for us to understand when it comes to South Africa in particular, that the reason why South Africa gets to basically be this international hub is really because of the white population that is still present in South Africa. And that presence essentially gives access for that country, that African country, as opposed to other African countries, to different international domains. And so we see this come into place when a story like this happens. So I'm going to read through it. It says, Ryanair drops an Afrikaans test after backlash from South Africans. Ryanair has dropped a requirement for South African passengers to prove their nationality before traveling by completing a test in Afrikaans. The British budget airline chief executive Michael O'Leary said after the policy caused a backlash among South Africans. So let's just lay the foundation again for people who don't know. Inside of South Africa, there are a majority people who are African, a majority Black population. About over 80% of the population, about 10% is white, and then you have like other minorities who also live in South Africa. This is a Black nation. This is an African nation. And yet this airliner is requiring passengers to pass a test for Afrikaans. And Afrikaans is essentially the language that the white population have historically spoken. This is the reality of apartheid. Obviously, Afrikaans was many times used as a weapon against the Black population to try to pressure them to assimilate, to try to exclude them from different public amenities. And so this is something that the people of South Africa have experienced for a long time. And still in 2022, we still see this being used by these smaller companies or bigger companies as a way to try to discriminate against the Africans. So since the South African government said last week it was taken aback by the low-cost carrier's decision to force UK-bound travelers holding the country's passport to take the test, calling the move a backwards profiling system, which is very curious to me why the South African government, although there was a lot of backlash, didn't announce any type of action being done against the airliner, any type of legal action. I mean, I know at least in America, if something was outwardly discriminatory like this, the federal government would have the right basically to enforce that this company follow the civil rights of these people. But essentially, it seemed like they were just, upset with the decision. Now, Afrikaans, again, it's spoken by just 12% of 58 million people in the country, and it's often associated with the former white-led apartheid government. So again, I wanted to just emphasize when it comes to South Africa, yes, South Africa gets to be seen as this wonderful destination for all Africans to go to. It gets to be seen as this place where essentially you can have a Western lifestyle on the African continent. That's one of the ways that it's marketed. It's a big travel destination. And usually whenever you hear Africans or people from abroad who don't want to experience the fullness of Africa, they'll probably say, well, I'll go vacation in South Africa or something like that. Because there are segregated destinations inside of the country that foreigners frequent. Foreigners will frequent these places, and the Africans who actually are indigenous to that land don't get any opportunity to even enjoy these types of places. And so it's important to understand that South Africa still operates like a separate society. Many times when we hear South Africa spoken about inside of the international domain, we have to understand they're not necessarily talking about us. They're not talking about the Africans, even though they are the vast majority of the population. They're talking about this form of government that exists unofficially, where you still have white power being put in place being reinforced over generations. That's what they're talking about when they talk about South Africa. And so it's important for us to recognize that we want a free Azania for all African people, especially given the fact that we've suffered so much inside of this particular country. We've suffered so much in this land, and it's about time that the indigenous Africans inside of South Africa can adequately be represented. So let's go to the next story. This next story, let me see, is something that's related. A lot of these are interrelated, I would say, because the big thing that you're going to keep hearing about when it comes to how our people are struggling right now is that a lot of people are trying to find a way out. And this is how we heard before a couple weeks ago, it was reported on this channel as well, that the United Kingdom has targeted migrants who live inside of the United Kingdom from countries that they're not desired from. So not the Ukrainian migrants, but they're targeting, for example, African migrants and some Middle Eastern migrants who are living inside of the UK. And they're going to essentially start expelling them from the United Kingdom. So let me just show you here some pictures from this article. A lot of people have been protesting this. Now, this is not something completely new. We should know that Rwanda in particular has, and also other countries like Libya, have been used as a way to push out the undesirables from certain countries. And so this is what happened as far as how the UK has a new deal with Rwanda to try to push out their undesirables out of their country and into Africa. So I'm not going to go into the whole story, but I do want to tell you about how the flights have been grounded as of right now. UK vows more Rwandan deportation flights after legal setback. The British government vowed Wednesday to organize more flights to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda after a last-minute court judgment grounded the first plane due to take off under the controversial deal. Home Secretary Priti Patel said preparation for the next flight begins now, despite legal rulings that none of the migrants earmarked for deportation could be sent to the East African country. So essentially there has been a halt because of, I believe it's one migrant who is Iraqi, who is basically trying to protest his deportation. But because of that, the courts essentially said, okay, just ground all flights for as of now. Under the deal that was signed just this past April, Britain and Rwanda, the UK government, between Britain and Rwanda, the UK government plans to send some migrants who arrive in UK as stowaways in a small boat to Rwanda, where their asylum claims will be processed. If successful, they will stay in the African country rather than return to Britain. So we've reported on this. You should have known by now. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says that the plan is a legitimate way to protect lives and thwart criminal gangs that send migrants on risky journeys across the New England Channel. Human rights groups argue that the plan rides roughshod over the protections afforded to refugees under rules set up under World War II. They have called the idea unworkable, inhumane, and a waste of money. And again, Britain paid Rwanda 120 million pounds, which is about $150 million up front for the deal. So right now it's halted. We'll see what happens. Hopefully something will be worked out that is not going to uproot a bunch of people. You know, this is, again, amidst all of the welcoming to Ukrainian refugees. People are not necessarily seeing that same love if you're not from a certain part of the world. And so a lot of refugees are they're seeking, asylum. They're seeking safety from dangerous situations that they come from. And we know colonialism created these situations. We know British colonialism created many of these situations. So now that the British government essentially wants to use this as an opportunity to penalize them and yet welcome other migrants, it's very hypocritical. And we don't want that type of upheaval of families, of children, of parents. We don't want to see that happen. Even if we feel like it's not ideal to move to the West, and we'll talk about a story about that next. We should understand that people have a stake in their loved ones being with them wherever they go. So hopefully something works out for this. Now, this is related. I'm going to share my screen again, and then we'll drink some water because I'm getting over another cold that I need to tend to. So where are we going? Okay, we're going right here. Now we see images like this. We can see that Africans, whenever we flee to the West, we're basically subjecting ourselves to some pretty dangerous situations. This is a picture that is an example of that. There was a poll, obviously toll. There was a poll that was done recently about essentially Africans on the continent, whether or not they want to stay in Africa or whether they want to go abroad to quote unquote developed nations. I'll just note that I feel like this poll has been very controversial because essentially the people who are talking about this poll a lot are people from the West. And so we know that the West does not want an influx of African migrants. We know that they see this as a real threat going forward. They do not want this huge, sizable African population moving into their country. That's something that we've known by now. And they tell us over and over again how, we have to stop illegal immigration, how we have to control the population. So they're telling us without so many words, they're telling us that they do not want these people to be migrating into Europe. Now, a poll was done essentially saying that a growing number of African youth want to move abroad. A rising number of African youth are making plans to migrate to developed countries, according to a survey of young people from 15 African countries. Now I didn't look at the, who did the poll and blah, 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 but this is what they're saying. So if this is true, let's just look at what they're claiming here. So they're saying because of the pandemic, climate crisis, political instability, violence, all of this has contributed to young people being jittery about their future since the COVID pandemic began, according to African Youth Survey published on Monday. They say 32% of the respondents aged 18 to 24 are optimistic about Africa's prospects, a drop of 11% since the last survey of its kind was published in early 2020. About 60% of Africa's population is younger than 25, and more than a third is aged between 15 to 34. In almost all countries, at least 2/3 of people surveyed believe their nations were going in the wrong direction, apart from Rwanda and Ghana. 60 and 56% were optimistic about their country's direction. So I thought this was interesting for a number of reasons. One, this is kind of a time where we're seeing like more than ever a lot of pro-Africa images, pro-Africa stories coming out, a lot of people who are repatriating back to the continent. You all know that I'm a big advocate. This is something I look forward to. And in the midst of this also, you have the conflicting worlds. Not everything is about going to Africa and getting rich and enjoying the warm weather. We should also understand that our people are many times being driven out of Africa because of the horrible conditions that we live in. In particular, we have COVID-19, obviously. We have, like they said, these climate issues or whatever is happening with that. But also the very serious thing that a lot of people don't want to talk about is that the food shortages. These shortages are going to really significantly affect Africa in the global south. It could be as soon as this year or could hit us next year. Everyone's warning that there's going to be a lot of hungry people, a lot of starving people, a lot of children who are not able to eat. And the natural thing that happens with that is that people will try to migrate somewhere else if they're living somewhere where all these things are happening. So why is this important to the colonial regimes? This is important to them because they understand that they have to keep these populations at bay. And that's why they're finding other ways to try to do that. You have UK scrambling, you have America always scrambling to keep my immigration down, and that's not going to change anytime soon. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this poll, though, because more and more I talk to people, like I'll say in America, to African people in America who are more like, get me out of here. Or people in Europe, I'll look online a lot, and like a lot of people have the same feelings. So how do you see like this difference? Essentially, like we have people from the continent, supposedly, if this poll is right, certain countries are, I guess, trying to go into the West, and us, many times we're trying to go East. So I'm really curious as far as like what you think about this. All right, here's the last story that we have, and some potentially really good news about Ethiopia and Tigray. This conflict has been going on for kind of a while at this point. A lot of instability. Obviously, people are losing their lives over in this conflict, and the instability is just adding to the difficulty that East Africa is facing right now. Because if you don't know, right now, as far as the climate crisis, not the climate crisis, the food shortage crisis, East Africa is really suffering. Somalia, Ethiopia, they're having droughts again. So food production is just very low there, and they're already projecting people are starving at this very moment. And this is an add-on with everything that everyone else is facing with the Ukraine war. We still have this one that we're fighting for people just to have basic stability inside of the region. So this is some potentially really good news. So Ethiopia's prime minister says the committee is looking into the possibility of peace talks again with the Tigray rebels. Ethiopia's prime minister Abiy Ahmed on Tuesday spoke for the first time publicly about the possibilities of a peace negotiation with Tigrayan rebels who have been locked into a 19-month war with federal forces, dispelling speculation that secret talks were already underway with the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Abiy said his government had instituted a committee to examine the possibility of holding negotiations. The conflict has driven hundreds of thousands of people to the brink of famine, displaced more than 2 million, and left more than 9 million in need of food aid, according to the UN. The thorny question, we know the UN, we don't necessarily trust them, but this is what they're saying. The thorny question of Western Tigray contested a region claimed by both Amharas and Tigrayans is among the issues expected to come up in any negotiation. TPLF has repeatedly said that Western Tigray has been occupied by Amhara forces since the war erupted in 2020, and they said this is a non-negotiable part of any agreement. So we shall see. Obviously, this does not mean that the conflict is going to be resolved. This does not mean that they're going to reach a compromise, but we know that they're going back to considering negotiations. And ultimately, again, we have to want peace in East Africa, and we have to want stability, because this is a time where our people are already facing serious food crisis and shortages. So hopefully something will be resolved. So that's really all I have for this week. I will be back next week, hopefully. And until then, I would just encourage you all, do watch the advertisement that's coming up about our conference, Pan-African Unity, Our Parish, a call for the abolition of neocolonialism. You know, neocolonialism is something we deal with a lot on this channel. So hopefully you can join that convention and be a part of that conversation. With that, I thank you all, and I'll see you all in the next video.